you dare.
The woman under the rain tree in the town of San Mateo. There is a rain tree older than the church, older than the school, older than the road that curves around it. The locals call it Puno and G. Luha, the tree of tears, because when the wind passes through its branches, it doesn't whisper, it sobs, and no matter how hot the day, or how dry the month, the earth beneath it is always wet, as if someone is always crying there. Some say it's just water from the roots. Others say something lives beneath, waiting, listening, remembering. One night during fiesta season, a group of teens came home from drinking. One of them, Jericho, saw a woman standing by the tree wearing a wedding dress soaked, like she had just walked out of a flood. He laughed and shouted, "Miss Kailangan Neo ba ng sake." The woman didn't move, just tilted her head and pointed at him. That night Jericho's car crashed into the canal. The engine was never found, only water in his lungs and dirt under his fingernails, as if he had tried to claw his way out of the ground. Maria was 17, loved stories more than parties. She had heard the tale of the rain tree, but didn't believe in ghosts, so she walked past it every morning on her way to school, until the day she heard the sound of sobbing, not just in the wind, but close, human, heavy, like someone who had lost everything. She turned and saw a woman kneeling at the base of the tree, back turned, veil covering her face. Maria stepped closer to ask if she was okay. The woman turned slowly, but her face wasn't there, just skin. Smooth and silent. Maria ran and never looked back, but the next morning her pillow was soaked, and the crying had followed her home. The barangay captain called a priest after too many people saw the woman. Too many nights of crying that made dogs whimper and bobbies scream. They dug near the roots, found a small wooden coffin wrapped in cloth. Inside were bones, tiny, cracked. The priest whispered prayers and poured holy water, but the ground rejected it. It steamed and hissed like oil on fire. A voice came from the hole. She was never named, she was never buried right. She was promised love, but left behind. The priest left that night and never returned. The tree kept weeping. Maria's grandmother gave her an old Bible wrapped in rope, said, "Keep this beside your bed or shall visit you in your dreams." Inside was a folded paper, old ink, shaking handwriting. I was to be his wife, but he never came. I waited beneath the rain tree like he said. I wore my dress, I brought the ring, but he chose another, so I stayed in the earth. And now wait for another who will love me like he promised. Maria felt cold reading it. The ink was wet, still dripping. During Sunday Mass, the candles went out all at once. The air turned damp, and the scent of flowers rotting filled the aisle. A girl stood up and screamed, "She's here. She wants to wear the dress again. She wants to walk down the aisle. She wants to marry anyone who looks into her veil." The girl collapsed, eyes wide, tears flowing, but her mouth wouldn't close. She had bitten off her own tongue. The mirror in the church cracked, and no one spoke for the rest of the Mass. An old woman came to town claiming to be the sister of the bride, who was never wed. She told Maria the story. Decades ago, a young woman fell in love with a man from the next province. They met under the rain tree, shared letters, promises, rings. She wore her dress on the wedding day and waited beneath the tree, but he never came. He had married someone else the day before. She never left. Rain came, flood came, but she stayed until the waters took her. Now she waits for anyone who will finish the vow. If you speak the words under the tree, she hears you. If you say, "I do," alone in the dark, she follows you home. Maria had a dream that didn't feel like a dream. She stood beneath the tree, dressed in white, barefoot, in mud. The woman stood beside her, veil lifted, no face, only eyes everywhere, blinking, crying, screaming. "You will not leave like he did." Maria tried to run, but her legs were roots. She woke up gasping, the walls dripping, a ring on her finger, and a voice whispering. "Tomorrow is the ceremony." They tried to burn it. The townsfolk poured kerosene, struck matches, prayed, screamed, wept. But the flames curved away from the bark, smoke rose from the ground. But the leaves did not catch. Instead, the woman appeared again, this time not crying, this time smiling. She held out her arms and called Maria's name. And from every mirror in town, water spilled, photos turned black, and the bells of the church rang without hands. Maria returned to the tree alone, wearing the white dress from her grandmother's chest. She stood in the rain and whispered, "You were never loved, but you were seen. You were never married, but you were remembered. Let me walk for you, let me finish it." The wind stopped the crying, ended, the roots parted, and Maria stepped into the earth. When they searched, they found nothing, only her shoes, and the sound of a wedding march coming from under the soil. They say every year during fiesta, a woman in white walks through San Mateo, not angry, not crying, just searching for someone who will look her the face and say the words she never heard. If you see her, look down, never speak your name, and never promise anything, because if she believes you, she will never leave your side again. The cry in the bamboo grove in the town of Kalinton, a small village near the mountains, and thick groves of Kauaian people go to sleep early, not because they're tired, but because after 7 at night, the bamboo starts to speak. It's not wind, it's not birds, it's crying, a baby crying. But no baby lives in the grove, and the elders say, if you hear the cry, don't follow it, don't answer it, don't even whisper back. Because it's not a child, it's something else. Leah was 12, brave, smart, and bored of superstitions. She lived near the edge of the village, where the grove was closest. Her Lola always lit candles on the windows and put salt by the door. Don't whistle after dark. She said, don't call anyone's name if you don't see their face, and never ever step near the bamboo after sunset. But Leah didn't believe. She thought the stories were just to scare kids into sleeping early. Until one night, she heard the crying. It sounded like a newborn, small, helpless, broken, coming from the trees, and it said, "Mama." She followed the sound only a few steps from their gate. She brought a flashlight, but the battery died as soon as she stepped off the path. In the clearing was a small bundle wrapped in cloth, moving, crying. She reached for it. It stopped crying, suddenly silent. Then it looked up, not a baby, not human. Its eyes were black as coal, its teeth long, sharp, jagged like glass. Its smile reached too wide, and its hands were claws. She screamed, but the grove swallowed the sound. Backslash. She ran until her lungs burned, branches scratched her skin. Something chased her, but made no sound. Only the wind moved, and the bamboo kept parting. She reached their house and slammed the door shut. Her Lola was waiting, crying already. I told you, never go to the trees. You've been seen, now you've been smelled. It knows your voice, it will never stop crying now. And when it cries again, it's for you." The villagers called for an albulario. He came with ash and oil and prayers. He stood by the grove and said, "This is not a new Tianak, this one is old, very old, fed too many times. It cries not because it's helpless, but because it knows it works, and now it has her scent." He gave Lear an amulet made from bone and stone. Keep this on you, or it will enter through your shadow. And don't answer the cry again, not even in dreams. Leah fell asleep clutching the amulet. She dreamed of a crib, old wooden legs rotten with moss inside, a baby. No face, only a mouth crying so loud it shook the floor. She looked closer. The crib was floating above a pit, and under it hundreds of his hands, children, rotten gray, clawing to pull her in. One grabbed her ankle. She woke up screaming. But the amulet was gone, only dirt in her hand, and a new scratch on her arm. 3 days later, a neighbor heard crying from their backyard. He thought it was Leah, and went to check. What he found was a bundle beside the old dry well. He touched it, it screamed, and something pulled him in. No one found his body, only long scratches on the wall of the well, and blood on the stones. Lola said, "It's coming closer. It's building a cradle again, but it doesn't want to be rocked, it wants to rock you." The albulario returned. He told them the old tale of a woman who gave birth alone in the grove, shamed, abandoned, bleeding. She buried the child in anger, no prayers, no name, no light. And when the sun set, the earth shivered. The child opened its eyes and saw no face, no God, only hunger. It grew in silence, fed on rot, insects, animals. Then wanderers. It learned to cry like the helpless, but inside it was only teeth and bone and hate. It became the Tianak, and it remembers who left it now. It waits for mothers who ignore cries or children who walk too far from home. That night voices came from the soil outside Lias' room. Not one voice, many children, some crying, some laughing, some calling her name. "Leah, come out. We miss you. Don't you want to see us?" The floorboards creaked, the air smelled like milk and blood. Her Lola clutched her tighter. "If you move now, you want wake up." Human yowl, wake up, with nails for fingers and stones for eyes, and yowl, cry for someone to hear you. But no one ever will. They prepared a ritual. The oldest in the town came, laid salt in a circle, placed eggs with hair and blood in each corner. Leah had to sit in the middle, hold a mirror, and not blink. "Whatever you see, don't scream. If you scream, it will know where you are. If you blink, it will step closer. And if you cry, you take its place." The candle burned blue, and in the mirror she saw it crawling on the ceiling, upside down, licking its claws, whispering songs. A baby's voice. The mirror cracked, the light burst, everyone fell silent. Then the crying began, louder than ever, all around them. The bamboo outside bent like kneeling, the soil split, and a hand reached out, tiny at first, then two big bones stretching, mouth opening. It stood in the doorway, grinning with broken teeth. Said, "You followed me first, now I follow forever." Leah stood holding the mirror like a shield, and spoke the old words taught by the albulario. "Return to soil, sleep, without name, cry without mouth, be child. No more be shadow forever." At dawn the grove was quiet for the first time in years. No crying, no wind, only stillness. The bamboo stood straight, and under one tree was the cracked mirror buried in salt. Leah never heard the crying again, but she never walked past the trees. She never answered unknown voices, and she never ever forgot the sound of something small and ancient pretending to be loved. Born of thorns, it started in the village of San Isidro, near the edge of the forest, where the trees grow tall, and no light enters after sunset. The church was old, the kind where the bell tower was cracked, and the Virgin's statue lined slightly like she was bowing in grief on a stormy night. A baby was found on the altar, wrapped in a blood-stained blanket. No note, no name, the priest Father Eladio took it as a sign, a test, a child of God abandoned by man. He took the baby and fed it, prayed over it, gave it the name Samuel, but Samuel never cried, not once, even when he was hungry, even when he was hurt, just silence. And eyes too sharp for a child. By the time Samuel turned 5, the nuns in the convent whispered that he never blinked when he looked at you, never seemed cold, never seemed warm. Animals avoided him, flies gathered near him. One night, a dog from the village went missing. Next morning, its collar was in Samuel's toy box, with teeth marks on it, not dog teeth, too small, too sharp, too human. The priest asked Samuel about it. He smiled and said the dog was barking too loud. I made it quiet just like Mama said. But no one knew his mother. Late at night, people began hearing crying from the church garden. Not Samuel. A different voice, high-pitched, trembling. Sometimes it laughed in the middle of the sobs when villagers checked. Nothing. Was there only claw marks on the earth and broken crucifixes hanging from the tree? The older nuns wanted him taken away, sent to a home in the city, but Father Eladio refused. He said the boy was a blessing, even as the candles went out, whenever he prayed, even as his own dreams filled with blood and thorns. A month later, a woman arrived in town wearing a red dress, dragging a heavy sack behind her. She went straight to the church and asked to see the child. When Father Eladio asked why, she said, because I gave birth to it, but I never carried it, and now it wants me back. She smelled of salt and soil, and her eyes looked empty, like someone who had seen something she couldn't forget. She begged the priest to let her see him just once, just before it's too late. But when they brought Samuel to her, she screamed and ran from the church. She never returned. Her body was found at the forest edge 3 days later, her throat torn, and a cradle carved into her stomach. A carpenter was fixing the old wooden planks beneath the church pews. When he found something wrapped in cloth, he opened it and dropped it in shock. Inside was a tiny skeleton, baby-sized, but not quite. Its limbs were longer, its skull wrong, too many teeth in its mouth, more than a baby should have. When Father Eladio came to see it, the cloth burst into flames, and the bones turned black. Samuel laughed from the confessional, even though no one told him, even though no one was near him. Villagers began reporting scratches on their doors, 3 lines vertical deep. And always there, after a storm, crops wilted overnight, goats birthed stillborns with twisted legs, and the well began to smell of rotting milk. People stopped going to church, said there was a darkness in the building now, said the baby that never cried had begun to whisper in their dreams, and that the forest was watching, waiting for him to come back. One night, Sister Clara confessed to Father Eladio that she knew the child's truth years ago. She had heard a woman giving birth alone in the forest, a young girl cast out for being with child out of wedlock. She buried the baby under thorns in the roots of the acacia tree, didn't want it, didn't name it, didn't bless it, and something else heard the cries, took the baby in, fed it with worms, and darkness grew it into something that mimicked innocence, something that knew love only as a trick. The next day, Sister Clara's mouth was sewn shut, no thread, no needle, just blood and Samuel's footprints at the foot of her bed. Samuel began disappearing from his room at night, only to be found at the edge of the forest, barefoot, staring into the dark. He said the trees were singing to him, that they knew his name, not Samuel, but something older, something in a tongue no one could speak. He said he remembered now. He remembered the thorns, the soil, the tiny coffin made of vines. He said the forest wanted him back. And this time he would bring others. A child went missing, then another, both last seen playing near the forest trail. Their toys were found near the church steps, covered in what looked like dried milk, and something else, a symbol drawn in blood. A spiral with an eye in the center. Father Eladio confronted Samuel. The boy looked up at him and said, "They wanted to come with me. They saw how beautiful it is in there, where there's no pain, no prayer, only hunger and songs." Then he held out his hand, and in it was a finger still warm. That night the villagers surrounded the church. They had torches, pitchforks, salt, and prayers. They demanded the boy be turned over. They said they saw his face in their mirrors, his hands under their children's beds, that even the dead dogs barked. When he walked past, Father Eladio refused. He barred the doors, protected Samuel, but as the crowd shouted, the bell tower rang on its own, and the statue of the Virgin cracked in half from inside. They heard a cry, not a baby, a woman screaming in agony, as if giving birth all over again. And when they entered the church, Samuel was gone, only a trail of blood and feathers leading into the trees. Search parties entered the forest. Few came back. Those who did were changed. One man came back blind, but said he still saw the child's face. Another came back laughing non-stop, until his heart stopped. They said the forest bent when Samuel walked through it, that birds sang backward, and the earth pulsed like a womb. They said he had built a cradle from bones, and that something rocked it every night. Years passed. The town rebuilt the church. No one mentioned Samuel, until the crying came back, now louder, now from every corner, now from inside people's homes. The bobbies born after that year all had teeth. Some were born whispering, others smiling in the dark, and in every home at least once the lights would flicker, and a small voice would say, "I remember you, Mama."
If you enjoyed this terrifying story, let us know in the comments below. Hit that like button to help us bring more cursed tales and dark legends to life. Don't forget to share this video with your friends, but warn them first. And if you dare, subscribe to this channel, because here in Pinoy Phobia, the horror never ends. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next cursed story, spine-chilling folklore, or true paranormal encounter from the shadows of the Philippines. Remember, some stories are meant to be heard, but others are meant to be warnings. Thank you for watching, and remember, whatever happens, don't look back.